Schoolgirls vanished in 1957. Picnic mystery. Chapter 1. Valentine's Day. The morning of Saturday, February 14th, 1957, dawned hot and still over the Victorian countryside. At Appleyard College for Young Ladies, a prestigious boarding school nestled in the rolling hills near Mount Macedon, the students were in a state of barely contained excitement. Valentine's Day was always special, but this year it coincided with the annual picnic at Hanging Rock, a beloved tradition that allowed the normally strict discipline of the school to relax for one glorious afternoon. Mrs. Beatrice Appleyard, the formidable headmistress who had founded the college 15 years earlier, surveyed her charges with a critical eye as they assembled in the entrance hall. 43 girls, ranging in age from 12 to 18, stood in their finest white summer dresses, hair neatly braided or pinned, straw hats protecting their fair complexions from the harsh Australian sun. "Ladies, please remember that you represent Appleyard College wherever you go," Mrs. Appleyard announced, her cultured English accent carrying authority that silenced the excited chatter. "You will conduct yourselves with decorum at all times. Miss McCraw and Mademoiselle de Poitiers will be supervising, and I expect absolute obedience to their instructions. Is that understood?" A chorus of, "Yes, Mrs. Appleyard," echoed through the hall. Miranda Lloyd stood near the back of the group, her golden hair catching the morning light that streamed through the tall windows. At 17, she was one of the oldest students and something of a legend at the school, beautiful, kind, and possessed of a natural grace that made everyone want to be near her. She caught the eye of her best friend, Marion Quade, and smiled. Marion, 15 and intellectually gifted, had been Miranda's closest companion since arriving at Appleyard College 2 years earlier. Where Miranda was ethereal and dreamy, Marion was practical and analytical, with dark hair and serious brown eyes that seemed to see more than most people. Standing with them was Irma Sutherland, 16, whose wealthy family owned vast properties in the Western District. Irma was vivacious and confident, with auburn hair and green eyes that sparkled with mischief. The three girls had formed a tight friendship, often to the jealousy of other students. "I hope it's not too hot," Irma whispered as the girls filed out to the waiting drag, a large horse-drawn carriage that would transport them to Hanging Rock. "I'm already melting." "The rock will provide shade," Marion replied practically, "and Miss McCraw said there's a creek nearby where we can cool our feet." Miss Greta McCraw, the mathematics teacher, was already seated in the drag, her angular face set in its usual expression of stern concentration. She was 42 years old, unmarried, and utterly devoted to her subject and her students. She wore a sensible brown dress and sturdy boots, and carried a small notebook in which she occasionally jotted observations about geological formations or mathematical patterns she noticed in nature. Beside her sat Mademoiselle Diane de Poitiers, the French teacher, who was far more relaxed and cheerful. She smiled and waved at the girls as they climbed aboard. "Come, come, mes chéris. Let us enjoy this beautiful day that le bon Dieu has given us." The journey to Hanging Rock took nearly 2 hours along dusty country roads. The girls sang songs, pointed out interesting sights, and speculated about what the picnic lunch would include. The drag passed through the small township of Wood End, where curious locals paused to watch the procession of white-clad young ladies. Hanging Rock appeared on the horizon like a sleeping giant, a massive volcanic formation that rose dramatically from the surrounding plains. Millions of years old, the rock was a place of strange beauty and stranger legends. The local Wurundjeri people considered it a sacred site and avoided it, speaking of spirits and unexplained phenomena. European settlers found it both fascinating and unsettling, with its labyrinth of boulders, hidden caves, and sudden drops. As the drag approached the base of the rock, 14-year-old Edith Horton craned her neck to see the summit. She was a plump, nervous girl, younger than most of her classmates, and desperate to be accepted by the popular older girls. "It looks like a monster," Edith said with a slight shiver. "Don't be silly," Miranda said kindly. "It's just stone, very old stone, but stone nonetheless." They arrived at the picnic grounds around noon. Mr. Hussey, the elderly gardener from the college who had driven the drag, helped the girls unload the picnic baskets, while Miss McCraw and Mademoiselle de Poitiers organized the setup. Blankets were spread under the shade of eucalyptus trees, and soon the area was transformed into an idyllic scene of Victorian gentility, transplanted to the Australian bush. The lunch was elaborate: cold chicken, ham, fresh bread, fruit, lemonade, and an assortment of cakes and pastries. The girls ate with good appetite, their usual table manners relaxed in the informal setting. Afterward, many of them dozed in the shade, made drowsy by the heat and the heavy meal. Miranda, however, felt restless. She stood and walked to the edge of their picnic area, gazing up at Hanging Rock. Something about the formation called to her, though she couldn't have explained what. "Would you like to explore the rock?" Marion asked, coming to stand beside her friend. "I would," Miranda said. "The view from the top must be extraordinary." Irma overheard and joined them. "An adventure. Let's ask permission." Miss McCraw, who was reading a book on geology, looked up when the three girls approached. "You wish to climb the rock? I suppose that would be educational. The geological formations are quite remarkable, but you must stay together. Don't stray from the marked paths and return within 2 hours. It's now 1:15. I expect you back by 3:15 at the latest." "May I come with them?" Edith Horton asked eagerly, having followed the older girls. Miranda hesitated. Edith could be tiresome, but her kind nature wouldn't allow her to refuse. "Of course, Edith, but you must keep up. We won't be dawdling." The 4 girls set off, carrying their hats, but leaving their gloves behind. The lower slopes of Hanging Rock were gentle enough, with a well-worn path leading upward through scrubby vegetation. But as they climbed higher, the terrain became more challenging. Massive boulders, some as large as houses, created a maze of passages and dead ends. Michael Fitzhubert, a 19-year-old Englishman visiting his uncle's property nearby, watched the girls begin their ascent. He'd ridden over to Hanging Rock out of curiosity, having heard about the school picnic from servants' gossip. Now, sitting in the shade of a boulder with his horse tethered nearby, he observed the 4 white-clad figures moving upward like ghosts against the dark stone. He was particularly struck by the girl in front, the blonde one whose movements had a floating, dreamlike quality. He would later tell police that she seemed almost to be sleepwalking, though her companions appeared normal enough. The girls climbed for nearly an hour, pausing occasionally to catch their breath or to admire the increasingly spectacular views. The Victorian countryside spread out below them in shades of gold and green, dotted with sheep and cattle. In the distance, they could see the blue line of the ranges. "It's like being on top of the world," Irma said, turning in a slow circle. Marion consulted her small compass, which she'd brought despite the teasing of her friends. "We're heading roughly northeast. The summit should be another 15 minutes climb." But as they moved higher, something strange began to happen. The sounds of the bush, birds calling, insects buzzing, wind rustling through eucalyptus leaves, seemed to fade away. An oppressive silence settled over the rock, broken only by their footsteps and breathing. Edith noticed it first. "Why is it so quiet?" she asked nervously. "The heat," Marion said, though she looked uncertain. Animals rest during the hottest part of the day. They reached a section where the path split. To the left, a narrow passage led between 2 enormous boulders. To the right, the trail continued upward, but became steep and potentially dangerous. Miranda, who had been oddly silent for the past several minutes, moved toward the left passage without consulting her companions. Marion and Irma followed automatically, as they always did when Miranda led. Edith hesitated, suddenly frightened by something she couldn't name. "Miranda, wait," Edith called. "I don't think we should go that way." But Miranda seemed not to hear. She walked forward as if drawn by invisible strings, her movements graceful and unhurried. Irma and Marion followed close behind, and Edith, not wanting to be left alone, reluctantly joined them. The passage between the boulders was cool and shadowy after the bright sunlight. It twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the rock's interior. Edith's unease grew with every step. "We should go back," she said, her voice trembling. "It's getting late, and Miss McCraw will be worried." "Just a bit further," Marion said, though she sounded unlike herself, distant, almost hypnotized. They emerged into a small clearing surrounded by towering rock walls. In the center was a flat stone that looked almost like an altar. The silence here was absolute, pressing down on them like a physical weight. Miranda walked to the stone and placed her hand on it. "Can you feel it?" she asked softly. "Feel what?" Irma asked. "I don't know. Something." Miranda's eyes had a faraway look. Edith began to cry. "I want to go back. Please, I want to go back now." Marion turned to comfort her younger companion. "It's all right, Edith. We'll go back in a moment, don't." But she never finished the sentence. At that moment, something happened that Edith could never adequately describe to investigators later. The air seemed to shimmer and distort, like heat waves on a summer road. A sound, not loud but felt more than heard, reverberated through the clearing. And then, Edith screamed and ran. She scrambled back through the passage, falling and scraping her hands on the rough stone, driven by pure terror. She ran without looking back, sobbing and gasping, until she burst out onto the main path. She continued running downward, her white dress torn and dirty, her hair wild. Below, at the picnic grounds, the other students had begun to stir from their post-lunch torpor. Miss McCraw checked her pocket watch. 2:45. The climbing party should be returning soon. But when Edith Horton came stumbling into the picnic area, hysterical and alone, Miss McCraw's expression shifted from mild concern to alarm. "Edith, where are the others?" Miss McCraw demanded, taking the sobbing girl by the shoulders. "Gone," Edith wailed. "They're gone! Something terrible happened." "What do you mean, gone? Where are Miranda, Irma, and Marion?" "At the rock, the clearing, the stone. Oh, Miss McCraw, it was terrible." Edith collapsed into incoherent sobbing. Mademoiselle de Poitiers rushed over, her face pale. "What has happened? Where are our girls?" Miss McCraw's mind worked quickly, calculating distances and times. "Mademoiselle, stay here with the students. Keep them calm. I'm going to find the missing girls. They've probably just gone further than intended and lost track of time." She started up the path at a rapid pace, her sensible boots making quick work of the initial slope. But as she climbed higher, searching for any sign of the girls, a growing sense of unease crept over her. The oppressive silence that had troubled the students now affected her as well. "Miranda, Irma, Marion," she called, her voice sounding strangely flat in the stillness. There was no response. Miss McCraw climbed higher, taking paths she thought the girls might have followed. Time seemed to behave strangely. When she checked her watch, she was surprised to find that 45 minutes had passed, though it felt like only 15. As 3:30 approached and then passed, Mademoiselle de Poitiers grew increasingly worried. Mr. Hussey, the gardener, suggested that he should ride to the nearest property for help. "Yes," Mademoiselle agreed. "Go quickly, please. Something is very wrong." By 4 o'clock, neither Miss McCraw nor the 3 students had returned. The remaining girls huddled together, frightened and confused. Some cried, others sat in stunned silence. At 4:30, Mr. Hussey returned with several men from nearby properties, including Michael Fitzhubert and his uncle. They organized into search parties and began to comb the rock systematically. "I saw them," Michael told the searchers. 4 girls in white dresses, climbing up the northeastern face around 1:30. The one in front, the blonde girl, she moved strangely, like she was in a trance. The searchers climbed as twilight began to fall, calling out names that echoed off the stone walls, and vanished into the darkening bush. They found nothing, no trace of the girls, no signs of where they might have gone. As night fell completely, making further searching impossible, the grim reality settled over everyone. 4 people had vanished from Hanging Rock without a trace. 3 schoolgirls and a mathematics teacher had simply disappeared, as if swallowed by the ancient stone itself. The police were notified. Sergeant Thomas Fitzpatrick of the Victoria Police arrived at the rock around 9 o'clock that evening with additional men and lanterns. He questioned the remaining students, particularly Edith Horton, but the girl was too traumatized to provide coherent information. "She keeps talking about a stone and something terrible, but she can't or won't describe what actually happened," Mademoiselle de Poitiers told Sergeant Fitzpatrick. "The poor child is terrified." Fitzpatrick organized search parties to continue through the night, though he held little hope of finding the missing persons in darkness. The rock was too vast, too complex, with too many places where someone could fall or become trapped. At Appleyard College, Mrs. Appleyard waited in her study, her usual composure cracking as the hours passed with no word. When a messenger finally arrived around midnight with news that the girls had not been found, she went white. "This is impossible," she whispered. 4 people cannot simply vanish, but they had vanished. And as the news spread through the district and then across Victoria, people began to ask the question that would haunt the region for decades. What happened at Hanging Rock on Valentine's Day, 1957? Chapter 2. The search dawn broke on Sunday, February 15th, revealing the full scope of the crisis. Hanging Rock, which had seemed so benign in the afternoon sunshine the previous day, now appeared menacing and alien in the cold morning light. Mist clung to the boulders, creating ghostly shapes that seemed to move and shift. Sergeant Fitzpatrick had not slept. He'd spent the night coordinating search efforts, interviewing witnesses, and trying to make sense of an increasingly baffling situation. Now, as daylight allowed for more systematic searching, he stood at the base of the rock with a growing team of volunteers, farmers, townspeople, and even some Aboriginal trackers he'd hastily recruited from a settlement near Lancefield. The Aboriginal men were reluctant to approach Hanging Rock. The eldest among them, a man called Old Jim by the whites, spoke to Fitzpatrick through an interpreter. "Bad place," Old Jim said, shaking his head. "Spirit place. Wurundjeri people don't go there. Something lives in the stone. Something old." Fitzpatrick, a practical man shaped by years of police work, didn't put much stock in superstition. But he respected local knowledge and listened carefully to what Old Jim had to say. "Have people disappeared from the rock before?" Fitzpatrick asked. Old Jim nodded slowly. "Long time ago, yes. Before white people came. Young men who went too deep into the stone didn't come back. After that, we stay away." Despite their reluctance, 2 of the younger Aboriginal men agreed to help track. Their skills proved immediately valuable. They found the path the girls had taken up the rock, identified the spot where Edith had run back down, and even located a hair ribbon belonging to one of the missing girls. "They went this way," one of the trackers said, pointing to the passage between 2 large boulders. 4 sets of footprints going in. 1 set, smaller, heavier footfalls, running back out. The other 3, tracks just stop. "Stop?" Fitzpatrick asked. "What do you mean?" "Stop? Stop. Like they flew away or sank into stone. No more tracks." The search parties combed through the passage and the clearing beyond. They found nothing. No more ribbons, no torn fabric, no signs of disturbance. It was as if 3 girls had simply ceased to exist at that precise location. By mid-morning, word of the disappearances had spread widely enough that newspaper reporters began arriving from Melbourne. They swarmed over the picnic grounds and lower slopes of the rock, interviewing anyone they could find and composing sensational accounts for the evening editions. "Mystery at Hanging Rock. Schoolgirls vanish without trace," would be the Melbourne Age's headline. The more lurid tabloids went further: "Stone swallows innocent maidens," and "Supernatural terror in Macedon ranges." Mrs. Appleyard arrived at the rock around noon, driven by her solicitor. She looked haggard, her usual imperious bearing shaken. She spoke briefly with Sergeant Fitzpatrick. "What are you doing to find my students?" she demanded. "Everything possible, ma'am. We have over 50 men searching, including experienced trackers. We're examining every foot of the rock." "And Miss McCraw, have you found any trace of her?" "Nothing yet, but we'll keep searching until we find them or determine what happened." Mrs. Appleyard's eyes filled with tears, which she quickly blinked away. "This will destroy the school. Parents will never trust their daughters to us again." Fitzpatrick felt a flash of irritation at her priorities, but kept his voice level. "With respect, ma'am, we're more concerned with finding 4 missing persons than with the reputation of your school." Throughout Sunday and into Monday, the search continued with increasing desperation. More volunteers arrived, including mounted police from Melbourne and search and rescue teams with dogs. The dogs were brought to the clearing where the tracks ended, but they behaved strangely, whining, backing away, refusing to enter the space. "I've never seen them act like this," their handler told Fitzpatrick. "It's like they smell something that frightens them, but there's nothing here." Michael Fitzhubert volunteered to join the search parties. He felt personally connected to the missing girls, having been one of the last people to see them. He climbed the rock repeatedly, examining crevices and caves, calling out their names until his voice grew hoarse. On one of these climbs, late Monday afternoon, he encountered an elderly man sitting on a flat boulder, smoking a pipe. The man wore rough bushman's clothing and had the weathered face of someone who spent his life outdoors. "Looking for those missing girls?" the old man asked. "Yes. Have you seen anything?" The man shook his head. "No. But I could have told them not to come here on February 14th. "Why? What's special about that date?" "Nothing to you moderns, perhaps, but the old people knew. February 14th, that's when the rock is most active. Something to do with the sun, the position of things. Bad day to be climbing around these stones." Michael wanted to dismiss this as more superstition, but something in the old man's matter-of-fact tone gave him pause. "Active? What do you mean?" "The rock does things, opens up in ways it shouldn't, takes people sometimes, gives them back sometimes, changed. You'll see." Before Michael could ask more questions, The old man stood and walked away, disappearing into a passage between boulders. When Michael followed seconds later, the passage was empty, with no sign of where the man might have gone. By Tuesday evening, February 17th, hopes were fading. 4 full days of intensive searching had produced nothing except the single hair ribbon and increasing confusion. The Victorian government, responding to public pressure and media attention, sent additional police resources and ordered a formal inquiry. Inspector Edmund Granger arrived from Melbourne to take command of the investigation. He was a no-nonsense career officer who approached the case with methodical precision. He re-interviewed all witnesses, re-examined all evidence, and organized the most comprehensive search yet conducted. Edith Horton, who had been too traumatized to speak coherently immediately after the incident, was questioned again under Granger's supervision. The poor girl was staying at Appleyard College, sedated with laudanum prescribed by the local doctor, jumping at every sound and crying out in her sleep. "Edith, I need you to try very hard to remember exactly what happened," Granger said gently. "I know it's difficult, but those girls are still missing. Anything you can tell us might help." Edith's eyes were red-rimmed and distant. "We climbed up. Miranda wanted to go higher. She was walking funny, like she wasn't really there. We went through the passage to the clearing. There was a flat stone, and Miranda touched it." "Yes? What happened when she touched it?" "The air. It changed. It shimmed and moved, like water. And there was a sound, but not a sound. I felt it in my bones. And then," she began to cry, "I can't remember. I was so frightened, I just ran. I didn't look back. I should have stayed with them. I should have helped." "You were terrified, Edith. No one blames you for running." Granger paused. "Did you see anyone else on the rock? Any men? Any strangers?" "No, just us. And it was so quiet. That's what scared me most, how quiet everything was." Granger thanked her and allowed the school matron to take her away. He sat in the parlor of Appleyard College, reviewing his notes. Nothing made sense. 4 people couldn't simply vanish from a rock face in broad daylight. There had to be a rational explanation. His working theories included: the girls had fallen into a hidden crevice or cave and were trapped somewhere in the rock's interior. They had been abducted by someone who was at the rock that day, though no suspicious persons had been reported. They had deliberately run away for reasons unknown, though this seemed unlikely given their backgrounds. Something had happened to cause them to become disoriented and lost, and they had wandered away from the rock entirely. Each theory had problems. Intensive searching had revealed no hidden crevices large enough to contain 3 girls and an adult woman. No strangers had been seen on the rock except Michael Fitzhubert, who had been in plain view the entire afternoon and had no motive for harm. The girls came from wealthy, stable families and had no apparent reason to run away, and if they had wandered away from the rock, someone in the surrounding farmland would have seen them. On Wednesday, February 18th, Inspector Granger made a decision that would prove controversial. He hired professional mountaineers from Melbourne to abseil down the cliff faces and examine areas that couldn't be reached by conventional climbing. These men, experienced in cave exploration and rescue, spent 2 days searching every possible crevice, cave, and shadow. They found nothing. On Thursday afternoon, the press of Victoria gathered at the base of Hanging Rock for Inspector Granger's statement. "We have conducted the most thorough search possible of Hanging Rock and the surrounding area," Granger said to the assembled reporters. "Over 200 men have been involved in this effort. We have examined every accessible part of the rock and many inaccessible parts as well. We have found no trace of the missing persons beyond a single hair ribbon. At this time, I cannot explain their disappearance. The investigation remains active, but unless new evidence comes to light, we are suspending the intensive search operations." "Are you saying they simply vanished?" one reporter shouted. "I'm saying we don't know what happened to them. This is unlike any case I've encountered in 25 years of police work. Do you believe in supernatural explanations, Inspector?" Granger's face hardened. "I believe in evidence and facts. When we have enough of either, we'll solve this case." But privately, to his second-in-command, Granger admitted his bafflement. 4 people disappeared in the middle of the afternoon from a location being observed by dozens of others from below. They left minimal physical evidence and no logical trail. If I believed in magic, I'd say they were spirited away, but I don't believe in magic, so I'm left with nothing. Chapter 3. The Discovery. 6 days after the disappearance, on Wednesday, February 20th, a boundary rider checking fences on a property adjacent to Hanging Rock made a discovery that would deepen the mystery rather than solve it. William Preston had been working on the western side of the rock, an area that had been searched but not intensively, as it was far from where the girls had been last seen. Around mid-afternoon, he heard what sounded like whimpering coming from a gully thick with ferns and undergrowth. At first, he thought it might be an injured animal, but as he pushed through the vegetation, he saw a flash of white fabric. His heart leapt. Could it be one of the missing girls? It was. Irma Sutherland lay curled in a hollow beneath a fallen log, wearing only her white underskirt. Her dress, shoes, and stockings were missing. Her feet were bloody and torn, her hair tangled with leaves and twigs. But she was alive. Preston ran back to his horse and rode at a gallop to the nearest property with a telephone. Within 30 minutes, Inspector Granger, Sergeant Fitzpatrick, and a doctor from Woodend had arrived at the location. Dr. Harold Mackenzie examined Irma where she lay, not wanting to move her until he'd assessed her injuries. The girl was conscious but unresponsive. Her eyes were open and fixed on nothing. She didn't speak, didn't react to questions, didn't acknowledge their presence at all. "She's in shock," Dr. Mackenzie said. "Severe psychological trauma. We need to get her to hospital immediately, but gently. Any rough treatment could worsen her condition." They carried Irma on a makeshift stretcher to the waiting wagon, then transported her to the Kinneton District Hospital. Mrs. Appleyard, when informed that one of her students had been found, rushed to the hospital and insisted on seeing her. Irma lay in a hospital bed, clean now, her wounds dressed, but still utterly silent and unresponsive. Her eyes stared at the ceiling, as if seeing something invisible to others. "Irma, dear, it's Mrs. Appleyard," the headmistress said, taking the girl's hand. "You're safe now. Can you tell us what happened? Where are Miranda and Marion?" There was no response. Irma's expression didn't change. Dr. Mackenzie pulled Mrs. Appleyard aside. "She's suffering from what we call hysterical mutism. It's a condition brought on by extreme psychological trauma. She's physically capable of speaking, but her mind has shut down that ability as a protective mechanism. Will she recover? Possibly in time, but it could be days, weeks, or even months before she's able to communicate. And when she does start speaking again, she may have no memory of the traumatic events." The news that Irma had been found alive spread quickly, reigniting both hope and speculation. If Irma had survived, perhaps Miranda and Marion were also alive somewhere on the rock. Inspector Granger immediately organized new search parties, focusing on the area where Irma had been found. But the discovery raised as many questions as it answered. How had Irma traveled from the clearing where the tracks ended to a location nearly half a mile away on the opposite side of the rock? Why was she wearing only her undergarment? Where were her dress, shoes, and corset? Dr. Mackenzie's examination revealed something else troubling. Irma showed no signs of sexual assault, which had been a fear given her partially undressed state, but she had unusual marks on her body, bruises on her arms and legs that didn't match any obvious fall or attack pattern. Some of the bruises were circular, as if something had gripped her with immense pressure. "It's almost like she was held or restrained by something," Dr. Mackenzie told Inspector Granger privately. "But the pattern doesn't match human hands." Most mysteriously, Irma's feet, though bloody and torn from walking barefoot over rough terrain, showed signs of exposure to extreme cold, frostburns, the doctor called them. But the weather on February 14th had been hot, temperatures in the mid-80s. How had her feet suffered cold burns in the middle of an Australian summer? Inspector Granger interviewed William Preston extensively, trying to determine how long Irma might have been lying in that gully. "The ground around her was disturbed, like she'd been moving about recently," Preston said, "and she was whimpering, as I mentioned, so I'd say she hadn't been there very long. Maybe a few hours at most, but she disappeared 6 days ago. Where has she been for the past 6 days? Preston had no answer for that. The search for Miranda and Marion intensified, with volunteers covering the western side of the rock with renewed energy. Surely if Irma had been found there, the others must be nearby. But 3 more days of searching produced nothing. On Sunday, February 24th, 10 days after the disappearance, Irma Sutherland spoke her first words. A nurse was adjusting her pillows when Irma's eyes suddenly focused, and she looked directly at the woman. "Where am I?" Irma asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. The nurse nearly dropped the pillow in shock. "You're in Kinneton Hospital, dear. You're safe. Do you remember what happened?" Irma's brow furrowed. I was at a picnic, at Hanging Rock. We went climbing. Miranda, Marion, Edith, and I. Her expression changed to confusion. That's all I remember. The picnic. Nothing after. Dr. Mackenzie was summoned immediately. He questioned Irma gently, trying not to push too hard too fast. Irma, you've been missing for 10 days. You were found on Wednesday wearing only your undergarments, on the far side of Hanging Rock. Do you remember anything about those 10 days? Irma looked genuinely shocked. 10 days? But that's impossible. I remember the picnic, and now I'm here. There's nothing in between. Nothing at all? No memories of where you were? What happened? How you got to where you were found? Nothing. It's like I fell asleep at the picnic and woke up here. Over the following days, doctors tried various techniques to help Irma recover her memories. Gentle questioning, hypnosis, showing her photographs of the rock and her companions. But the result was always the same. She had no memory of anything between early afternoon on February 14th and waking in the hospital on February 24th. The press had a field day with this development. Theories proliferated. Amnesia caused by trauma, deliberate suppression of terrible memories, even hypnotic suggestion or drugging. The more sensational papers suggested supernatural forces at work, pointing to the mysterious nature of Hanging Rock and the local Aboriginal warnings about the place. Irma's parents arrived from their property in the Western District, distraught, but grateful their daughter was alive. Her father, Samuel Sutherland, was a wealthy grazier with significant political connections. He demanded answers. "Inspector, my daughter has been through something terrible," Sutherland told Granger. "She may not remember, but her body tells a story. Those marks, those injuries, someone or something hurt her. I want to know what happened, and I want those responsible held accountable. Sir, we're doing everything possible to determine what happened, but without Miss Sutherland's memories, and without finding the other missing persons, we have very little to work with. Then find them. Miranda Lloyd and Marion Quade are still out there somewhere. Dead or alive, they deserve to be found." But as days stretched into weeks, the chances of finding Miranda and Marion alive diminished to nearly zero. Even finding their bodies seemed increasingly unlikely. It was as if they had been erased from existence, leaving only questions and grief. Chapter 4. Aftermath. By March of 1957, the story of the Hanging Rock disappearances had become national news. Newspapers across Australia covered every development, or lack thereof. The case fascinated and horrified the public in equal measure. How could 3 people vanish so completely in broad daylight? What had happened to cause Irma's amnesia? Where was Miss McCraw? The absence of the mathematics teacher was particularly puzzling. Miss McCraw had gone up the rock to search for her students and had never returned. Unlike the schoolgirls, Miss McCraw was a mature woman, experienced in outdoor activities, and familiar with the local terrain. She should have been able to find her way back, even if disoriented. A shepherd working property near Hanging Rock reported seeing a woman matching Miss McCraw's description on the evening of February 14th, walking along a road some distance from the rock. She'd been moving oddly, he said, almost stumbling, and hadn't responded when he called out to her. By the time he'd gotten closer, she'd disappeared into the bush. Inspector Granger investigated this sighting thoroughly, but found no evidence to support it. No further traces of Miss McCraw were ever discovered. At Appleyard College, the atmosphere had become oppressive. Parents descended on the school, demanding explanations and removing their daughters. Within 2 weeks of the disappearances, enrollment had dropped from 43 students to fewer than 20. The school's reputation, carefully built over 15 years, was in ruins. Mrs. Appleyard became increasingly erratic, firing staff without cause, making strange accusations, locked in her study for hours. The strain of the disaster was visibly breaking her. In early March, Irma Sutherland was deemed well enough to leave hospital care, though she still had no memory of her missing time. Her parents made the decision to take her back to England, away from the scene of her trauma and the relentless press attention. Before she left Australia, Inspector Granger made one final attempt to unlock her memories. He arranged for Irma to be taken back to Hanging Rock, hoping that seeing the location might trigger recall. It was a disaster. The moment Irma saw the rock formation, she began screaming hysterically. She collapsed, had to be restrained, and spent the next 3 days sedated in hospital. Whatever had happened to her at Hanging Rock, her subconscious was desperate to keep it buried. "We won't try that again," Dr. Mackenzie said firmly. "The girl's mind is protecting itself from something it can't process. Forcing her to remember could cause permanent psychological damage." Irma Sutherland left Australia in mid-March, never to return. She would live the rest of her life in England, eventually marrying and having children, but she never recovered her memories of those 10 missing days. In later years, she refused to discuss the incident at all, changing the subject whenever anyone mentioned Australia or Hanging Rock. The families of Miranda Lloyd and Marion Quade were left in agonizing limbo. No bodies had been found, but the likelihood of survival after so many weeks was essentially zero. Both families held memorial services, though without remains to bury, there was no closure. Miranda's parents, wealthy pastoralists from Queensland, offered a substantial reward for information leading to the discovery of their daughter, £500, an enormous sum. Despite numerous false leads and supposed sightings, no credible information emerged. Marion Quade's father, a professor at the University of Melbourne, took a different approach. He became obsessed with researching Hanging Rock itself, convinced that the key to understanding his daughter's disappearance lay in the geological and historical nature of the formation. Professor Quade spent months studying everything about the rock, its volcanic origins, its mineral composition, Aboriginal legends associated with it, historical accounts of strange phenomena. He interviewed Old Jim and other Aboriginal elders, recording their stories about the spirit place and its dangers. He developed a theory, which he presented at the university and later published in an obscure academic journal, that Hanging Rock possessed unusual magnetic properties that could cause disorientation and confusion. He speculated that the girls might have become lost in a network of previously undiscovered caves within the rock and had been unable to find their way out. The rock is like a labyrinth, Professor Quade argued in his paper. It's entirely possible that my daughter and her companions found their way into passages that were then blocked by rockfalls, trapping them. Their remains could be inside the rock, forever hidden from discovery. The theory was plausible, but couldn't be proven without literally tearing apart Hanging Rock, which was both impractical and, by now, legally protected as a site of cultural significance. As autumn turned to winter in 1957, the active investigation began to wind down. Inspector Granger had pursued every lead, interviewed hundreds of witnesses, organized countless searches, and gotten nowhere. The case remained open, but there was nothing more to investigate. His final report, filed in July of 1957, concluded, "After 5 months of intensive investigation, we have been unable to determine what happened to Miranda Lloyd, Marion Quade, and Miss Greta McCraw. One of the 4 missing persons, Irma Sutherland, was recovered alive, but with complete amnesia regarding the period of her disappearance. The case presents numerous anomalies that defy rational explanation. In the absence of further evidence, this investigation must be suspended, though the case will remain officially open." The Victorian coroner held an inquest in August. Edith Horton, still traumatized but able to testify, gave her account of the climb and the mysterious events in the clearing. Michael Fitzhubert described seeing the girls ascend. Various searchers testified about the strange ending of the tracks and the dog's refusal to enter the clearing. The coroner's verdict was anticlimactic. On February 14, 1957, Miranda Lloyd, Marion Quade, and Miss Greta McCraw disappeared under circumstances that remain unexplained. Without bodies or definitive evidence of their fate, this inquest cannot determine whether they died by accident, misadventure, or unknown causes. The matter is held in abeyance pending discovery of further evidence. It was an unsatisfying conclusion to an unfathomable mystery. At Appleyard College, the end came swiftly. In September of 1957, with enrollment down to just 8 students and no new applications, Mrs. Appleyard announced the school's closure. She dismissed the remaining staff, sold the property, and disappeared from public life. 1 month later, Mrs. Appleyard was found dead at the base of Hanging Rock. Whether she fell, jumped, or met some other fate was never determined. Some said she had become obsessed with the rock, visiting it repeatedly, trying to understand what had taken her students. Others suggested guilt had driven her to suicide. A few whispered that the rock had claimed another victim. Her death brought fresh media attention to the case, but no new evidence. Mrs. Beatrice Appleyard was buried in the wooden cemetery, her headstone bearing only her name and dates. No epitaph. Chapter 5. Echoes Through Time. The disappearances at Hanging Rock entered Australian folklore, becoming one of the country's most enduring mysteries. Over the decades that followed, various theories were proposed, investigated, and ultimately found wanting. In the 1960s, A journalist named Helen Morton spent 2 years researching the case for a book. She tracked down survivors, interviewed aging witnesses, and uncovered police reports that had never been made public. Her book, The Hanging Rock Mystery, An Investigation, was published in 1968 and rekindled public interest in the case. Morton's research revealed several intriguing details that hadn't been widely known. She discovered that in the weeks following the disappearances, several people in the Woodland area reported seeing strange lights around Hanging Rock at night, glowing orbs that moved through the boulder fields and then vanished. Farmers reported livestock behaving strangely when near the rock, refusing to graze in certain areas. Most tantalizingly, Morton found a previously overlooked witness statement. A motorist driving past Hanging Rock on the evening of February 14th had seen a woman standing on a boulder near the base of the rock. The woman was wearing Victorian-style clothing, long dress, bonnet, that seemed oddly out of place. When the motorist stopped and called out, offering assistance, the woman had smiled but said nothing, then seemed to fade away into the gathering darkness. The motorist had reported this to police at the time, but it had been dismissed as a case of mistaken identity or poor visibility. Now, reading the report decades later, Morton wondered if the woman might have been Miss McCraw or one of the girls, disoriented and confused. But without any way to verify or investigate further, it remained just another puzzling detail in a case full of them. In 1975, the disappearances gained renewed attention when Australian filmmaker Peter Weir released a movie loosely based on the events, though fictionalized and embellished. The film captured the eerie quality of the mystery and introduced a new generation to the story of the vanished schoolgirls. The film's success brought tourists to Hanging Rock, some seeking thrills, others genuinely moved by the tragedy. The Victorian government, recognizing the site's cultural significance, created Hanging Rock Reserve, protecting the formation and the surrounding land. Signs were erected warning visitors to stay on marked paths and not to climb during extreme weather conditions. But the signs couldn't prevent the occasional disappearance or injury. Over the years, several people went missing briefly at Hanging Rock, though most were eventually found, lost, disoriented, but alive. A few were never seen again, adding to the rock's sinister reputation. Michael Fitzhubert, who had been one of the last to see the girls before they vanished, carried the memory with him throughout his life. He returned to England shortly after the disappearances, unable to shake the guilt of not having done more. In interviews given late in his life, he spoke about that Valentine's Day, with a mixture of sadness and bewilderment. "I saw them climbing," he told an interviewer in 1992. 4 girls in white, moving up the rock. The one in front, Miranda, though I didn't know her name then, she moved like she was being drawn by something. Not walking, really. Almost floating. I should have known something was wrong. I should have followed them, made sure they were safe, but I didn't, and they were gone. Edith Horton, the only one of the 4 climbers to return that day, lived with the trauma for the rest of her life. She left Australia, moved to Canada, and rarely spoke about what had happened. When researchers contacted her in the 1980s, hoping she might have recovered some memories, she declined to participate. "I was there," she wrote in a brief letter. "I saw something I can't explain, and don't want to remember. Please respect my privacy, and don't contact me again." She died in 2003, taking whatever she knew to her grave. Professor Quade continued his research into Hanging Rock until his death in 1979. His papers, donated to the University of Melbourne, contain thousands of pages of notes, calculations, and theories about the rock's properties. Some colleagues dismissed him as a man driven mad by grief. Others thought he might have been onto something. One of his final journal entries, written just weeks before his death, read, "I have come to believe that Hanging Rock exists in multiple states simultaneously, like a quantum particle that can be in 2 places at once. The rock may occupy more than one-dimensional space. On certain days, under certain conditions, the barriers between these spaces become permeable. My daughter didn't die. She went somewhere else, but I will never know where." It was the conclusion of a broken man, perhaps, but it resonated with those who found rational explanations insufficient. In 1987, exactly 30 years after the disappearances, a memorial plaque was installed at Hanging Rock. It read, "In memory of Miranda Lloyd, Marion Quade, and Miss Greta McCraw, who disappeared from this place on February 14, 1957, and Irma Sutherland, who was found but lost her memories. May they be remembered always. The ceremony was attended by aging witnesses, researchers, and family members. It was a moment of collective remembering, an acknowledgement that sometimes mysteries don't get solved, and the best we can do is honor those who were lost. Epilogue. The mystery endures. As of the 21st century, the Hanging Rock disappearances remain officially unsolved. The case file sits in the Victorian Police Archives, a thick folder full of witness statements, search reports, and unanswered questions. Modern investigators, using advanced forensic techniques and cold case methodologies, have occasionally reviewed the evidence, hoping that new technology might reveal what 1950s-era police work could not. But the paucity of physical evidence makes this difficult. The hair ribbon found during the original search was tested for DNA in 2005. It was confirmed to have belonged to Miranda Lloyd, but that fact added nothing to understanding what happened to her. In 2012, a team of forensic archaeologists received permission to conduct a limited dig at Hanging Rock, specifically in the clearing where the tracks had ended. Using ground-penetrating radar and other technologies, they searched for any evidence of graves, hidden chambers, or anomalies in the rock structure. They found nothing conclusive. There were some unusual electromagnetic readings that the team couldn't fully explain, but nothing that provided answers about the missing women. Hanging Rock itself remains a popular tourist destination, visited by thousands each year. Some come for the natural beauty, others drawn by the mystery. A few visitors report strange experiences, feelings of disorientation, lost time, or unexplained sounds. Whether these are genuine phenomena or the power of suggestion is impossible to determine. The reserve managers maintain a respectful distance from the more sensational aspects of the story, focusing on the historical facts and the genuine tragedy of lives lost. But they acknowledge that the mystery is part of what makes Hanging Rock special. In Wood End, the small town that was thrust into the national spotlight in 1957, older residents still remember the excitement and horror of those weeks. Some claim to have inside knowledge or family stories about what really happened. But when pressed, these stories usually dissolve into speculation and third-hand accounts. The truth is that no one knows what happened to Miranda Lloyd, Marion Quade, and Greta McCraw on Valentine's Day, 1957. They climbed Hanging Rock on a hot Australian afternoon and never came back. One of their companions, Irma Sutherland, was found alive days later, but had no memory of where she'd been or what she'd experienced. The official theories remain. They fell into a hidden crevice and were killed, their bodies forever trapped within the rock. They were abducted by an unknown person and murdered, their bodies hidden so well they were never found. They became disoriented, wandered away from the rock, and died of exposure in the bush. Something else happened. Something that defies conventional explanation. The case has been referenced in academic papers on missing persons, in books on Australian mysteries, in documentaries and films. It has become part of Australian cultural consciousness, a story that every child knows at least in outline. Miranda Lloyd, who would have turned 84 in 2024, is still officially listed as missing. So is Marion Quade, who would have been 82, and Miss Greta McCraw, who would have been 109. Their names are remembered, their fates unknown, their disappearance a mystery that has never been solved and likely never will be. Hanging Rock stands as it has for millions of years, silent and ancient, keeping its secrets. On quiet mornings, when mist clings to the boulders and the bush is still, it's easy to imagine those four figures in white dresses climbing upward, moving into shadows and mystery, disappearing into something we can't quite understand or name. The rock remembers, perhaps, but it does not speak, and so the mystery endures, as haunting now as it was on that hot Valentine's Day in 1957, when 3 schoolgirls and their teacher walked into the stone and were never seen again. Chapter 6. The Witnesses. While the official investigation stalled and public interest gradually waned, there remained a core group of people for whom the Hanging Rock mystery was not just a historical curiosity, but a living wound that never fully healed. Among them was Sarah Wayborn, a student at Appleyard College who had been on the picnic, but had not climbed the rock. Sarah was 13 years old in 1957, a shy orphan whose guardian had placed her at the college primarily to be rid of the responsibility. Unlike the other girls, Sarah had no family anxiously waiting for news, no one to remove her from the school when scandal struck. Sarah had worshipped Miranda Lloyd from afar. Miranda had been kind to her when others weren't, had defended her from bullying, had made her feel seen. The loss of Miranda devastated Sarah in ways that went beyond the shock felt by other students. For her, it was personal. After the school closed in September of 1957, Sarah was transferred to another institution in Melbourne, but she never forgot. Throughout her life, she would live to be 76 years old, dying in 2020. Sarah maintained a scrapbook about the disappearances. She collected newspaper clippings, magazine articles, and later printouts from internet forums discussing the case. In 1998, when she was 54 years old, Sarah gave an extensive interview to a documentary filmmaker. It was one of the few times she spoke publicly about her memories of that day. "I remember the heat," Sarah said, her eyes distant with remembering. "It was oppressive, heavy, like the air itself was pushing down on us. Most of the girls felt it. We were all drowsy after lunch, lying in the shade. But Miranda, she seemed energized by it. She stood looking up at the rock, and she said something I've never forgotten." "What did she say?" the interviewer asked. "She said, 'It's calling to me. Can you hear it?' I asked what she meant, but she just smiled and said I wouldn't understand. Then she gathered the others and they went up. I watched them climb until they disappeared around a bend. That was the last time I saw Miranda Lloyd." Sarah paused, struggling with emotion even after 41 years. "Sometimes I wonder if I could have saved her. If I'd gone with them, maybe whatever happened wouldn't have happened. Or maybe I'd have disappeared too. I don't know which would have been worse." Another witness who never found peace was Tom Hussey, the elderly gardener who had driven the drag to Hanging Rock that day. Tom was 63 in 1957, and the weight of responsibility, however irrational, nearly crushed him. He had been tasked with keeping the girls safe, and he had failed. In the months after the disappearances, Tom would walk to Hanging Rock nearly every day, searching areas he'd already searched dozens of times, calling out names to the silent stone. Local police eventually asked him to stop, fearing he might hurt himself or interfere with any future investigation. Tom Hussey died in 1962, just 5 years after the disappearances. Those who knew him said he'd died of a broken heart. His final words, according to the nurse attending him, were, "Tell them I'm sorry. Tell the girls I'm sorry." Mademoiselle Diane de Poitiers, the French teacher who had been supervising the picnic, returned to France shortly after the school closed. She had been questioned extensively by police and subjected to harsh criticism in the press. Some articles implied that her supervision had been negligent, though there was no evidence of this. In France, Mademoiselle de Poitiers entered a convent and lived out her remaining years in contemplative silence. She died in 1983, having never spoken publicly about the incident, but in her personal effects, found after her death, was a diary she'd kept during her time at Appleyard College. Her niece, who inherited these papers, eventually allowed researchers to examine them. The final entry, dated February 15th, 1957, the day after the disappearances, read, "They are gone, and I do not understand how this is possible. I have gone over that afternoon 1,000 times in my mind. The girls asked permission to climb. Miss McCraw gave it with conditions. Stay together. Return by 3:15. These were reasonable conditions. The girls were responsible, not wild or reckless. Miranda especially was mature beyond her years, thoughtful and careful, and yet they vanished. Not in a storm, not in darkness, not in conditions that would make losing one's way understandable. They vanished in broad daylight on a clear day from a place where they should have been easily found. And Miss McCraw, who went to find them, solid, practical Miss McCraw, she too is gone. I do not believe in supernatural forces. I am a woman of reason and faith in God's natural order, but I cannot explain this through reason. Something at Hanging Rock is wrong. Something there does not follow the rules we understand, and I fear we will never know what it is." The diary provided no new facts, but offered a window into the psychological impact the disappearances had on those who survived them. Perhaps no one was affected more profoundly than the parents of the missing girls. Samuel and Catherine Lloyd, Miranda's parents, spent the rest of their lives searching for answers. They hired private investigators, consulted psychics and mediums, despite their skepticism, and personally visited Hanging Rock dozens of times, hoping somehow their daughter might still be found. In 1972, 15 years after Miranda's disappearance, Samuel Lloyd received a letter from a woman in Perth claiming to have information about his daughter. The woman said she'd had dreams, vivid, recurring dreams, in which Miranda appeared and tried to communicate. In these dreams, Miranda was trapped somewhere cold and dark, calling for help. Lloyd traveled to Perth to meet this woman, a schoolteacher named Margaret Brennan, who had no apparent connection to the case. She described her dreams in detail. Miranda wearing her white dress, standing in what looked like a cave or tunnel, frost on the walls despite the summer heat outside. Miranda trying to speak but unable to make sound. A sense of being caught between places, neither fully present nor fully gone. "I know this sounds like the ravings of a lunatic," Mrs. Brennan told Lloyd, "and perhaps I am mad, but these dreams are so vivid, so consistent. I see your daughter as clearly as I see you now. She's trying to tell us something, but I can't understand what." Lloyd returned to Melbourne with this information and convinced authorities to conduct one more search of Hanging Rock, specifically looking for caves or passages that might match the description from the dreams. Police humored the grieving father, but the search yielded nothing new. Samuel Lloyd died in 1978, his wife Catherine just 6 months later. They were buried in Queensland, their headstone bearing not only their names but also that of their daughter, Miranda Lloyd, 1940-1957, forever lost, forever loved. Professor Arthur Quade, Marion's father, took a different approach. Rather than searching for his daughter physically, he sought to understand the phenomenon that had taken her. His academic research into Hanging Rock became increasingly esoteric, and some said unhinged. In the final years of his life, Professor Quade became convinced that Hanging Rock was what he called a thin place, a location where the barrier between different realities or dimensions was permeable. He cited Aboriginal traditions about the rock being a spirit place, historical accounts of strange disappearances in the area, and even quantum physics theories about parallel universes. "What if my daughter didn't die?" he wrote in a paper that was rejected by every academic journal he submitted it to. "What if she simply went somewhere else? What if on that particular day, at that particular time, the rock opened a doorway, and they walked through it? What if they're alive somewhere we can't reach, trying to find their way back?" His colleagues pitied him. His theory was unfalsifiable. It couldn't be proven wrong because it couldn't be tested. But for Professor Quade, it offered something that rational explanations couldn't. Hope. Hope that Marion was alive somewhere, even if not in the world he inhabited. He spent his final years corresponding with physicists, mystics, and anyone who might support his theories. When he died in 1979, he left behind boxes of correspondence and calculations, all trying to prove that his daughter had been taken somewhere rather than killed. His widow, Eleanor Quade, lived until 2006. In her final interview, given just months before her death at age 92, she was asked if she believed her husband's theories. "Arthur needed to believe Marion was alive," Eleanor said. "He couldn't accept that she was dead, gone, beyond reach. His theories gave him comfort. Were they true? I don't know. I don't think anyone will ever know, but I understood why he needed them." "And what do you believe happened?" the interviewer asked. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "I believe my daughter went up a rock formation one afternoon and never came back. Whether she fell, was taken, or walked into another dimension hardly matters. The result is the same. She's gone, and I've missed her every day for 49 years. Chapter 7. The Theories Over the Decades. Various theories about the Hanging Rock disappearances gained and lost currency. Each new generation of investigators brought fresh perspectives, but none brought definitive answers. The abduction theory held that an unknown person or persons had been at Hanging Rock that day, had lured or forced the girls away, and had murdered them. This was the most conventional explanation, and the one favored by early investigators, but it had significant problems. No suspicious persons had been reported in the area. Michael Fitzhubert had been nearby, but he'd been in plain view the entire time, and had no motive. The rock would have been visible from below. Someone forcibly taking 4 women would have been seen or heard. And where were the bodies? Even the most careful killer would have left some trace. In 1967, a convicted murderer named Robert Hayes, facing execution for other crimes, confessed to killing the Hanging Rock victims. His confession was detailed and lurid, describing how he'd stalked the girls, led them into a cave system, and killed them one by one. Police investigated thoroughly, hopeful that this might finally provide closure. But Hayes' confession fell apart under scrutiny. He'd been in prison in Sydney on February 14th, 1957. There were records proving it. His confession was a bid for attention, or perhaps a deranged man's fantasy. He was executed later that year, taking his false confession with him. The accident theory suggested that the girls had fallen into a hidden crevice or cave system and had been killed in the fall. Their bodies remained inside the rock, in passages too deep or complex to be found by searchers. This theory had support among geologists, who pointed out that Hanging Rock was honeycombed with caves and fissures, many unexplored. But the Aboriginal trackers had followed the girls' footprints to the clearing and found them simply ending, not going over an edge, not showing signs of slipping or falling, just stopping as if the girls had been lifted into the air. In 1993, a caver named Douglas Mackenzie became obsessed with proving the accident theory. He obtained permits to explore cave systems within and around Hanging Rock, spending weekends and holidays squeezing through tight passages, mapping unexplored chambers, searching for any sign of the missing women. He found nothing. No bones, no fabric, no remnants of the clothing or shoes the girls had worn. After 3 years of searching, Mackenzie gave up, convinced that if the bodies were in the rock, they were in places literally impossible for humans to access. The runaway theory proposed that the girls had deliberately disappeared, staging their own vanishing for reasons unknown. Perhaps Miranda had been pregnant, or one of them was fleeing an arranged marriage, or they'd been seduced by promises of a different life. This theory was popular in tabloid speculation, but had little factual support. All 3 girls came from comfortable backgrounds. They had no known reasons to run away, no suspicious contacts, and no history of rebelliousness. And what about Miss McCraw? Why would a 42-year-old mathematics teacher abandon her life to join 3 teenagers in a flight to nowhere? Moreover, Irma Sutherland had been with them. She was found with no memory, but clear signs of trauma. If the disappearance had been planned, why was Irma returned in such condition? The supernatural theory encompassed various explanations involving paranormal phenomena, alien abduction, dimensional portals, time slips, or malevolent spirits. This theory was dismissed by serious investigators, but had a persistent following in fringe circles. Books published in the 1970s and 80s with titles like The Hanging Rock Portal and Stolen by Time presented elaborate arguments involving ley lines, magnetic anomalies, and Aboriginal spiritual beliefs. Some claimed that Hanging Rock was a window area where our reality intersected with other planes of existence. In 2003, a team of paranormal investigators spent a night at Hanging Rock with electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and other equipment designed to detect unusual phenomena. They recorded some anomalous readings, electromagnetic fluctuations that didn't correspond to any known source, but nothing that proved supernatural activity. The lead investigator, Dr. Teresa Hammond, concluded, "There are certainly unusual properties to Hanging Rock. Whether these are merely geological phenomena we don't yet understand or something more exotic remains unclear. But I can say with confidence that we detected energy patterns inconsistent with normal environmental readings." This statement was seized upon by believers as proof of paranormal activity, while skeptics pointed out that unusual readings were far from evidence of dimensional portals or spirits. The climate event theory, proposed by meteorologist James Weatherby in 1985, suggested that the girls had been caught in a freak weather phenomenon, a localized temperature inversion or sudden change in atmospheric pressure that had caused extreme disorientation and hypothermia. Weatherby pointed to the frostbite-like injuries on Irma's feet as evidence of exposure to extreme cold. He theorized that a pocket of frigid air, trapped in the rock's cavities and suddenly released, could have flash-frozen the girls, or caused them to flee in confusion. The theory had some scientific merit but couldn't explain the complete disappearance of 3 bodies. Even if they died of exposure, their remains should have been found. The conspiracy theory held that someone powerful, perhaps a wealthy family member or connected individual, had been involved in the girls' deaths and had used influence to cover it up. Police had been bribed or threatened. Evidence had been destroyed. Witnesses had been silenced. This theory gained traction in the 1990s, when government corruption scandals made Australians more cynical about official explanations. But investigations by journalists found no evidence of a cover-up. The police files, when finally made public in the early 2000s, showed genuine bafflement rather than deliberate obstruction. Perhaps the most honest assessment came from Inspector Edmund Granger himself, in a letter written to a colleague in 1972. 15 years after the events, you ask me what I truly believe happened at Hanging Rock. I wish I could give you a definitive answer. I investigated that case as thoroughly as any in my career. We searched every inch of that damned rock. We interviewed every possible witness. We pursued every lead, no matter how unlikely. And we found nothing that made sense. The girls walked up that rock and ceased to exist. One was returned with no memory, as if her mind had been wiped clean. The others are simply gone. I do not believe in supernatural explanations, but I also cannot accept that a rational explanation exists, and we simply failed to find it. Sometimes, rarely, things happen that don't fit into our understanding of how the world works. The Hanging Rock disappearances may be one of those things, or perhaps the explanation is simple, and we're all just too blind to see it. I don't know anymore, and that uncertainty has haunted me every day since. Chapter 8. The Legacy. The Hanging Rock disappearances left an indelible mark on Australian culture and consciousness. The case influenced literature, film, and art. It shaped how Australians thought about their landscape, vast, ancient, and potentially hostile to human understanding. In schools across Victoria, the story was taught as both history and cautionary tale. Students learned about the importance of safety in the bush, the dangers of wandering off, the need to respect nature's power. But they also learned that sometimes, despite all precautions, terrible things happened for reasons we couldn't explain. Hanging Rock itself became something of a pilgrimage site. Every year on February 14th, small groups gathered at the rock to remember the lost girls. Some came out of genuine mourning or respect. Others came seeking thrills or hoping to experience something paranormal. A few came to leave offerings, flowers, poems, small tokens, at the base of the rock where the memorial plaque had been installed. The reserve managers eventually had to establish rules. No climbing after dark. No large gatherings without permits. No seances or paranormal investigations without prior approval. The rock, after all, was not just a mystery site, but also a place of natural beauty that needed protection. In 2007, on the 50th anniversary of the disappearances, a major commemorative event was held. Researchers, family members, mostly descendants of the original families, as parents and siblings had nearly all passed away, and interested public gathered for a day of remembrance and reflection. A descendant of Miranda Lloyd, her great-niece, a woman named Jennifer Cassidy, spoke to the assembled crowd. "I never knew my great-aunt Miranda," Cassidy said. "She disappeared 14 years before I was born. But I grew up with her story. I grew up knowing that our family had lost someone in circumstances no one could explain. And I want to say today that whatever happened to Miranda and her friends, they deserve to be remembered not as a mystery, but as people. Real girls with real lives, real hopes, real futures that were taken from them." It was a moving speech that reminded everyone that behind the mystery were human casualties, lives, unlived, potential unfulfilled, families forever marked by loss. Professor Diane Kingston, a cultural anthropologist who had studied the Hanging Rock phenomenon for her doctoral thesis, presented findings about how the case had shaped Australian attitudes toward the landscape. Before Hanging Rock, Kingston explained, Australians largely saw their country's unique geological formations as curiosities or tourist attractions. Hanging Rock changed that. It introduced an element of menace, a sense that the land itself might be somehow hostile or incomprehensible. This fed into existing anxieties about Australia's colonial history, about being European people in a landscape we didn't fully understand. The mystery also resonated because it violated expected narrative patterns. In Western storytelling, we expect resolution. The detective solves the crime. The lost are found. The questions are answered. Hanging Rock denied us that resolution, and in doing so, it became a story that couldn't be filed away and forgotten. It remained open, unresolved, demanding attention. Kingston's analysis highlighted why the case remained culturally significant decades after it occurred. It wasn't just the mystery itself, but what the mystery represented. The limits of human knowledge, the inadequacy of rational explanation when confronted with certain phenomena, the uncomfortable reality that some questions might never be answered. In the art world, Hanging Rock inspired numerous works. Painters created haunting images of white-clad figures disappearing into stone. Sculptors crafted abstract pieces representing loss and absence. Writers penned novels, poems, and plays, exploring themes of disappearance and the unknowable. The most successful of these was playwright Marcus Thornton's The Rock Remembers, which premiered in Melbourne in 1989. The play imagined the interior lives of the missing girls in the hours before they vanished. giving them voices and agency that the historical record had largely erased. In Thornton's version, Miranda was not just a beautiful, ethereal figure, but a young woman wrestling with expectations and desires. Marion was brilliant and questioning, pushing against the limitations placed on women in 1950s Australia. Irma was vivacious, but also lonely, using humor to mask deeper insecurities. The play ended ambiguously. The girls walked into the stone, and the audience never learned their fate. But they'd been humanized, made real in ways that newspaper accounts and police reports never could. "I wanted to reclaim them from the mystery," Thornton said in an interview. "They'd become symbols, archetypes, almost mythological figures. But they were teenagers. They had thoughts and feelings and dreams. Whatever took them away, it took real people, not just characters in a mystery story." The play ran for 3 years and was revived multiple times, always to strong attendance and emotional responses from audiences. In literature, the case inspired not just nonfiction accounts, but also numerous novels that used the disappearances as starting points for fictional explorations. Some stayed close to the known facts, others spun wildly speculative tales, but all grappled with the central question: how do we make sense of the inexplicable? The most acclaimed of these novels was Eleanor Pritchard's The Clearing, published in 2012. Pritchard imagined an alternative history where one of the girls left behind a diary describing increasingly strange experiences in the days before the picnic, dreams of the rock calling to her, a sense that something was waiting, premonitions of vanishing. The diary, in Pritchard's fiction, was discovered decades later in a forgotten trunk, providing psychological insight into the girl's state of mind. Critics praised the novel for its literary quality and emotional depth, even while acknowledging that it was entirely invented. "Fiction allows us to explore truths that facts can't access," Pritchard said when asked about taking liberties with real events. "We'll never know what Miranda Lloyd was thinking on February 13, 1957. But we can imagine it, and in imagining it, we can understand something about human experience that pure history can't convey." Chapter 9. Modern Investigations. In the 21st century, advances in technology raised hopes that the Hanging Rock mystery might finally be solved. Cold case units, equipped with tools that would have seemed like science fiction in 1957, reopened the investigation multiple times. In 2018, a team from Monash University received funding to conduct a comprehensive geophysical survey of Hanging Rock. Using ground-penetrating radar, electromagnetic conductivity sensors, and 3D laser scanning, they created the most detailed map of the rock's internal structure ever produced. The survey revealed previously unknown cave systems, hollow spaces within the rock where water had eroded softer stone, and various geological anomalies. Several of these spaces were large enough to contain human remains. With great anticipation and media coverage, exploration teams entered these newly discovered chambers. They found mineral formations, underground water, and in one case, a colony of bats. They found no trace of the missing girls or their teacher. Dr. Rachel Morrison, who led the survey team, gave a press conference after the exploration concluded. "We've mapped approximately 85% of Hanging Rock's internal volume," Morrison explained. "The remaining 15% consists of spaces too small for human access or too unstable to explore safely." Could human remains be in those unexplored spaces? Theoretically, yes, but there's no evidence suggesting they are, and no way to confirm without literally destroying significant portions of the rock, which would be both impractical and a violation of heritage protection laws. The question of what might be in that final 15% would continue to haunt theorists and investigators. In 2020, journalist Natasha Chen produced a podcast series called Vanished: The Hanging Rock Mystery. Over 12 episodes, Chen interviewed descendants of those involved, consulted experts in fields ranging from forensic science to Aboriginal history, and presented every theory in detail. The podcast was downloaded over 5 million times globally, introducing the case to audiences who'd never heard of it. Chen's concluding episode was titled Living with Uncertainty. "After months of research," Chen said in that final episode, "I've concluded that we may never know what happened to Miranda Lloyd, Marion Quade, and Greta McCraw. Not because the investigation was incompetent. It wasn't. Not because evidence was destroyed or covered up. It wasn't. But because sometimes reality produces outcomes we can't explain with our current understanding. Maybe someday new information will emerge. Maybe advancing technology will reveal what 1950s technology couldn't detect. Or maybe this is one of those rare cases that will remain forever mysterious, a reminder that despite all our knowledge and tools, the universe still holds secrets we can't access. The podcast's success led to renewed public interest. Hanging Rock Reserve reported a 30% increase in visitors in the year following the podcast's release. Most came respectfully, but some caused problems, attempting to conduct unauthorized digs, carving names into protected stone, or staging elaborate paranormal investigation shows without permits. In response, the reserve increased security and enacted stricter penalties for vandalism or illegal activity. A ranger named Thomas O'Brien, who'd worked at the reserve for 15 years, spoke about the challenge of balancing public interest with site protection. "People are fascinated by the mystery, and I understand that," O'Brien said, "but some forget that this is a real place where real people died or disappeared. It's not a theme park or a movie set. It's a memorial, and it deserves respect." The most recent serious investigation occurred in 2023, when the Victorian Cold Case Unit assigned Detective Sarah Liu to review all available evidence using modern analytical methods. Liu spent 18 months on the case, applying forensic psychology, victimology analysis, and advanced data modeling to the known facts. Her report, released in 2024, was both thorough and inconclusive. Liu identified several previously overlooked witness statements that might have deserved more attention. She noted inconsistencies in timeline reconstructions that suggested some witnesses' memories might have been less reliable than originally thought. She proposed new search areas based on probabilistic modeling of where disoriented individuals might have traveled, but ultimately, Liu reached the same conclusion that every previous investigator had. There was insufficient evidence to determine what happened. "The case presents multiple anomalies that defy conventional explanation," Liu wrote in her summary. "The complete absence of remains despite extensive searching. The mysterious reappearance of Irma Sutherland with total amnesia and injuries consistent with exposure to extreme cold in the middle of summer. The abrupt ending of footprints in the clearing. The strange behavior reported by witnesses. Time distortions. Unusual silence. Disorientation. Any one of these anomalies might be explained away. Together, they create a pattern that doesn't fit standard scenarios for missing persons cases. I cannot determine what happened to the missing individuals. I can only document that something highly unusual occurred at Hanging Rock on February 14th, 1957, and that this event resulted in 3 permanent disappearances and 1 traumatized survivor." Liu's report effectively closed. The official investigation, though the case remains technically open, without new evidence, there was nothing more to be done. Epilogue. The rock endures on Valentine's Day, 2025, 68 years after the disappearances. A small group gathered at Hanging Rock for a commemorative service. The group included descendants of the missing girls, researchers who had studied the case, and a few elderly locals who remembered 1957. Among them was Claire Morrison, aged 82, who had been a 12-year-old student at Appleyard College on that fateful day. She was one of the few remaining survivors who had actually been present at the picnic. "I dream about them sometimes," Claire said, looking up at the rock formation that had haunted her generation. "Miranda, Marion, Irma. I see them in their white dresses, climbing upward, and I want to call out, to warn them not to go, but I never can. In the dream, I'm frozen, unable to speak, and they disappear into the stone, and I wake up crying." She paused, wiping her eyes. 68 years. Most of my life lived in the shadow of this mystery. I've had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. I've traveled the world, had a career, experienced joy and sorrow. But this day, this place, it's never left me. A priest from Woodend led a brief service, reading poetry about loss and remembrance. Flowers were placed at the memorial plaque. A moment of silence was observed. As the group began to disperse, a young woman approached Claire Morrison. She was perhaps 30 years old, with blonde hair and an earnest expression. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Stephanie Lloyd. Miranda Lloyd was my great-great-aunt. I never knew her, obviously, but I wanted to come today to represent the family, to remember her." Claire took Stephanie's hands. "Your great-great-aunt was beautiful and kind. She was special in ways I couldn't have articulated then, but can now. She made everyone around her feel seen and valued. Whatever happened to her, she deserved better." They stood together, 2 generations separated by decades, united by connection to a shared mystery. As the sun set that evening, Hanging rock cast long shadows across the Victorian countryside. The ancient stone, which had stood for millions of years and would stand for millions more, kept its secrets. Birds called from the eucalyptus trees. A cool breeze moved through the boulder fields. Everything was as it had always been. Somewhere, perhaps, Miranda Lloyd and Marion Quade existed in some form. Their atoms returned to the earth, their energy dispersed into the universe, their memories preserved in the hearts of those who'd loved them, and in the historical record that refused to forget them. And Hanging Rock remained, silent, enigmatic, eternal, a testament to the limits of human understanding, a reminder that despite all our technology and knowledge, we are still small creatures in a vast and mysterious universe, capable of being swallowed by forces we can neither comprehend nor control. The mystery endures because some questions have no answers, some disappearances have no explanations, some losses leave only absence, and we must learn to live with that absence, to honor it, to remember those who vanished into it. Miranda Lloyd, Marion Quade, and Greta McCraw walked into the stone on a hot Valentine's Day in 1957. They never walked back out. And in the end, that is all we can say with certainty. The rest is silence, stone, and mystery.